welcome to Apologetic Showdown. I'm here with Braden of Instrumental Reason, and I posted a link to his channel in the description, so go ahead and check that out. And yeah, is there anything you wanted to introduce about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I guess I could just kind of cover my position on the great debate. The theism is I'm an atheist. I was a evangelical Christian for about a little over 20 years, and then got into the uh, philosophy of religion discussion, and that sort of over a long period of time, that and a bunch of other things kind of contributed to me eventually deciding that I didn't believe that God existed any longer. And so I've been an atheist for about, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, something like that. And I obviously, as evidenced by my presence here talking to you, I enjoy the conversation and, stretching my mind and still listening to ideas of others, on the other side of the topic. So yeah, that's kind of, where I'm at now. And, just enjoy I've kind of like gotten back into Twitter a little bit, which is probably not a good thing. I kind of went on like a Twitter break for a while recently and felt better when I was off of it. So I'm not sure why I'm kind of spending more time on it again, but yeah, I enjoy the conversation. So thanks for having me on the channel. It's really cool. You're going to get I'm bringing no traffic with me from my channel of 8 subscribers and my 2 videos on there. So it's nice of you to have me on though.
Yeah, no problem. I don't bring a lot of traffic when I go on channels. But yeah, and yeah, definitely Twitter can be problematic.
Yeah, certainly. Are you Catholic? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm a Roman Catholic.
Okay, gotcha. Have you always been Catholic? Were you raised Catholic?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I have. Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm
I've
definitely
just started
interested in.
kind of delving into your channel, so I don't know a ton about you, but I started watching some conversations recently and
Cool.
enjoying them. So
Good. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I'm Catholic, but I'm most interested in talking to atheists and agnostics. Is the dialogue I enjoy the most. Although I do engage with Protestants some, but and fellow Catholics some.
yeah.
Yeah. So, what was the main issue that you would say that kind of, or maybe it probably wasn't one issue though, but what was one of the main points that kind of drove you to atheism, or tension that you saw?
Yeah, I kind of I'll breeze over the transition from fundamentalism to there was a shift where I was raised in a fundamentalist Christian household and kind of held to more or less the things that are associated with that until I started doing research on my own and started getting into more of the conversation. I took an apologetics my from middle school through to high school. I attended a Christian school and I had an apologetics class in my last year of high school, and I got into John Lennox. I was a big fan of his, and I still am. I still like the way he kind of communicates. He's a really smart guy. But basically, there was a shift from fundamentalism to okay, it's obvious that evolution happened, and the Earth is way older than I thought it was. So there was kind of that, and then the philosophical stuff. Probably, not necessarily ashamedly so, but obviously I kind of got into the new atheism kind of stuff, and that started sparking my interest. Obviously I know now there's way there's way more philosophically rigorous people who you can look into their work and you'll get way more way better to probably pay attention to them. But I just kind of started dissecting and picking apart why do I actually believe this, and basically I kind of like dismantled like I dismantled a lot of my own kind of, things I thought were good justifications for that belief. I kind of like, started rethinking. So I was like, well, there are surely like some others out there, smarter, more learned Christians who have been around a lot longer than me have surely like found this stuff. So I could just go and I kind of considered it like, an opportunity for spiritual growth and like theological, research. And I was like, this will be a good like growing experience. I'll do a lot of research and find like lots of different, lots of different like learned Christians who have things to say about this. And I just kept looking and finding answers that I didn't really think that I didn't think that those answers cut it. And so it was kind of like, death of a thousand cuts. And you hear this sometimes from other atheists and agnostics. And so it was kind of like the dismantling of the reasons. And actually probably afterwards, I got into a little bit more of the like, because it kind of started with, well, there's just all my reasons have kind of been dismantled. And then like problem of evil wasn't that's usually like the linchpin for that's like the nail in the coffin for a lot of people. Like wasn't even a consideration in my personal transition. But, and I actually for a while, maybe kind of naively, but only recently have I come to kind of start to reconsider it again as a more powerful argument against theism. Because, for a while, for most of the time, I've been a non-believer. I've still been like, yeah, but problem of evil, you can't demonstrate like a logical incompatibility with, God and the existence of evil. So what good is that argument for? But I don't know, recently, not trying to like bring it up now, although we can, because I've just kind of brought it up so we can talk about it. I don't really care, but I don't know, lately I've stuff like that and other arguments I've kind of been looking into some more of that stuff and like, probabilistic or, arguments kind of along those lines, arguing against like, naturalism is more probable inherently, or I'm not a naturalist, but just, stuff like that, or, God conceptually is problematic. So there's kind of a sketch.
Sure. So you say you're not a naturalist, so that usually atheism will go hand in hand. So what do you mean by that?
That I'm not a naturalist. I mean, I definitely am natural. I definitely kind of lean towards naturalism. I just haven't like, I don't know where I'm at currently. I'm not in a place where I feel like I'm kind of apprehensive to jump fully into that camp and be like, yes, this is, because frankly, I'm not sure I like actively think that I'm pretty close. I kind of lean that direction, but I don't know. And and honestly, like, I'm not classically educated in philosophy or anything like that. I'm just, I just read on my own, and I'm kind of, self-interested, but, yeah, so I think I have more research to do before I can say that I like, have made a good, strong decision to adopt that as like a worldview or whatever. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. You said you took an apologetics class. Was that your senior year of high school or?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to teach high school theology actually in a Catholic
Oh, is that right?
school, and I taught apologetics to seniors. So that's
nice.
I didn't sounded like they taught like young Earth creationism at your school or something like that.
They did at so I had like my senior year of high school was online, and I did it. So I attended like an actual Christian school in person from 6th grade to 11th grade, and due to like family circumstances, I ended up doing my senior year online via a different Christian online school organization, but and I did my 11th grade year and my 12th grade year simultaneously, which was terrible. I don't recommend it for anyone because I'm not like a really good student either. I barely made it through high school, so but yeah, my regular school had like we had chapel on Wednesdays, and yeah, my science classes were like evolution wasn't taught. It was everything was like it's a private Christian school, so all the curriculum was had like the theological stuff was in tandem with everything else. So and yeah, and then I had that apologetics course, and I wish I could. I mean, I enjoyed it, and I've kind of been like interested in philosophy from like in high school. I started realizing like this is pretty cool, and people are thinking about things and kind of analyzing stuff. I enjoy doing that, so I kind of although despite that, I can't really remember much from that course. Maybe it's because, like I said, I was doing 2 years of school in a row, or at the same time, so it's all kind of a blur. But yeah, so you taught theology. Was like apologetics part of that?
Yeah, and that's why I brought it up. So apologetics was like one of the courses that the senior year students taught. Now, at a Catholic school, they're more open to like evolution and things. So,
Oh, right. Yeah.
I taught that to the students. I try to, kind of how my channel is, except my students weren't. I won't go there. Not all of them were
Right.
interested, but probably not most people who tune into my channel are either.
Right.
But yeah, anyways, that was the only reason I brought that up. But,
Okay. Gotcha.
But yeah, so you said it's not the problem of evil. So yeah, I hear that from a number of atheists, like that's not like their main argument. But honestly, like that would be the only argument that could, push me away from faith. I see. That's why I focus so much on it on my channel. But I'm just curious, like, what would you say was it like just finding arguments unconvincing for theism, or?
Yeah, pretty much. That's kind of what tipped me. That's kind of what tipped me over the edge. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. Is there an area where? Well, we can talk. I'd be kind of curious, like, because like I said, I mean, I do kind of lately. Although, like, problem of evil wasn't something that was really like initially kind of really contributing to my move from theism to atheism. It is like something I've started considering more lately. And like I said before, like at first I thought it was kind of pointless to bring it up because you can't demonstrate a logical contradiction. So at least as far as I can tell. So I was like, why waste your time with that? But I don't know. Lately, I have been thinking that it is like, it is worth bringing up, and it probabilistically. I mean, I certainly think that it holds weight, and especially like, I think it's motivating. And I don't mean this in like a negative way, but I think it's motivating for so many people, and it really like is the thing that like gets them to start thinking, because it is like it's one of those arguments that like intuitively everyone can sort of identify with that feeling of like, yeah, like maybe God gave us free will, or he wanted us to like he's giving us the opportunities to learn lessons and be virtuous, or whatever your kind of theodicy is. But like, man, there's some really bad stuff that people are capable of. Like, couldn't he have just, the gratuitous angle, right? Like, did it have to be as bad as it is? Like that kind of thing. And I was hearing another one of your discussions recently where you were talking about it. And don't ask me to recall specifics, because I can't currently. I just thought that like your, I don't know, you kind of had some interesting thoughts on it. Be curious to hear more. Maybe we can discuss that for a few minutes. Like, and you said it's your, like, if there was an argument that would persuade you out of theism, it would be that one. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the only one I find persuasive. So like right now I see like atheists on Twitter and stuff, a lot of, not just on Twitter, but we'll bring up like this sort of simplicity of atheism or simplicity of naturalism. That's like a popular argument right now that like
Hmm.
atheism's simpler. And honestly, like that has no pull on me whatsoever. And that's not to say
Okay.
it doesn't for some people, but like,
Sure.
but yeah, the problem of evil though, especially, yeah, that has, I can definitely see that. That's a powerful argument, I think. And I don't think that, I agree with you that I don't think there's a way to show there's a logical contradiction, but like the logical problem. But that doesn't mean it's not a strong argument, right? Because
Hmm.
as you said, like you could say, yeah, there's not a logical contradiction, strictly speaking, but you should still try to provide some kind of plausible answer. Otherwise, the totality of evidence is like a really strong piece. Like there may not, like most
Hmm.
arguments aren't going to
Right.
necessarily generate a logical contradiction, but they could still be
Hmm.
very powerful
Sure.
intuitively. And so I agree with you on that. And yeah, but yeah, in regards to my theodicy, so it's not like it is an original theodicy I've come up with, but it's definitely draws upon some thoughts that some others have argued. And just to kind of break it down, just in general, I've done a
Hmm.
number of videos on it, and I kind of explain it a little bit differently each time. But the idea is that, so I argue that it's a plausible tenet of theism that God creates all the laws of physics, whatever that exactly means,
Hmm.
and that that's guided by his intellect and his will, so it's sort of his mind. But that if he were to fully conform this sort of system of physical laws to his intellect and will, that would be a perfectly operating universe, so to speak. But that would also mean that people would have perfectly operating desires, and then we would, perfectly desire God. We wouldn't desire evil at all, or at least that's a plausible. I think it's a plausible consideration. But that would mean that we were, in a sense, forced into that relation, if we're looking at this in a relational sense. And I would say it's at least plausible. I find it intuitively plausible that, forcing a relation would seem morally problematic. And if God can't do anything morally problematic, then he wouldn't be able to do that. But then that means he'd have to start people out in a universe with the physical laws are not perfectly conformed to his intellect and will. But then once you grant that, then it kind of opens up this sort of Pandora's box, and now you have laws that can bring about some disastrous things. And I think it's a powerful theodicy because I'm not arguing like, well, this event occurred. A lot of times theists will say like, well, God has some event. Like it seems like a tragedy, but really it was
Hmm.
for the good. And like it's possible, but I don't really buy that. Like to me, that's a tough sell. So I think the strength of this theodicy is I think it can cover any type of suffering. So it really comes down to just like, do you find those starting points to be plausible? I think that they're plausible. I mean, one could reasonably object to them, but it's
Hmm.
also going to have to be looked at in the light of how persuasive you find theism as a whole. So I already find theism plausible, and then
Sure.
I think this theodicy is fairly plausible, so I'm going to give it more credence. But that's right. I think it. So yeah, I think it's a pretty plausible theodicy. Of course, I like it because I came up with it, but I also
Right.
came
Of
up with
course.
it because I wasn't satisfied with the other theodicies I was hearing, and
Right.
like skeptical theism is like good enough. I think if you're already committed to theism, but like it doesn't satisfy me to say like, well, God has these reasons or these greater goods that we can't see. Like I'm not satisfied with that. So it's like I want to have a
Hmm.
theodicy if I can, and I don't know. I like that theodicy, but different people will have different tastes. I don't know if anybody else. There are a couple of people that have told me they like it, but I haven't gotten a lot of support from other theists. So
Mm. Um, why do you think that is? Why do most theists kind of
um,
say, I'm not jiving with that? What's the most common response you
that's
get?
a yeah. I don't know. I mean, that's what I've been trying to kind of like fish around for.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm pretty unknown amongst people, so even if it is a good argument, most people don't probably know about it. But
Hmm.
I think a lot of theists are hung up on this idea. Like, well, first of all, I don't mean this to be like arrogant, but a lot
No,
of
no.
theists into apologetics are just repeating things that like William Lane Craig says.
Sure.
And if
Yeah.
it's not something William Lane Craig or maybe like Alexander Proust or somebody says,
Hmm.
then they think it's a non-starter. And like
Right.
I'm really trying to encourage Christians to move away from that. And there are
Hmm.
others who are trying to do that too. Not because like those guys are brilliant,
Hmm.
but like that doesn't mean they're right on everything. And
Sure.
nobody's right on everything. And like I think Craig especially is like really weak on like moral type questions, like about suffering and like Old Testament things.
Hmm.
Incredibly weak. And like he's brilliant, like he's like a genius. But like
Yeah,
he's
for sure.
really, I think his weak spot in his apologetics is responding to things like that. But yeah, what I find is a lot of so anyways, and kind of tying with that, a lot of theists are kind of attached to this idea of called like I'm slipping on the word, but I'm slipping on the word, but it's something like radical providence. Like they want to
Okay.
God to like oversee every little event, like every
I
single
see what you're
thing was
saying.
planned by
Hmm.
God. And like some theists would even think if you don't hold to that, that's like unorthodox. Now, I don't actually think the Bible teaches that, and I don't think it's a traditional view. Like if you go back, not that I'm an expert at all in church history, but like it's more of a later development as far as I
Hmm.
can tell. And that's not to say it's wrong, but like a lot of Christians are really wedded to that idea, and I think it's hard for people to let go of it. So that would
Mm.
probably be one reason somebody would look at my theodicy and go, well, it kind of sounds like you're saying God doesn't have control over every little detail in the world. And I would just say, like, yeah, but it's like to me that's the biblical view. Like the
Mm.
biblical, at least in the New Testament, the biblical New Testament view seems to be God is saying that, or this they're saying this is a fallen world. Things aren't working the way God wants at this time, but He's going to correct it in
Hmm.
the end. And I think it's the New Testament view, but I mean it gets. But again, like convincing people of it, if anything, is very difficult. So.
Right. Especially if it maybe hinges on some like differences in theological perspective, which.
Right. Especially Calvinists. Like, I mean, a
Hmm.
Calvinist intuitions, like, I just cannot understand. Like, it just
Right.
doesn't make sense. Like, and I respect their faith, but
Hmm.
like, I really don't understand. Like, I mean, there's a theory that Calvinism is like one of the biggest causes of atheism
Hmm.
because it presents Christianity as so abhorrent that if that's what somebody comes to believe and they have a well-developed conscience, they're just going to reject Christianity. And
Yeah,
I
like the
kind of
whole
get that.
yeah, like the whole idea of people being predestined for hell, certain people is not yeah, that's gonna rub a lot of people the wrong way. I was never a
Right, right.
Calvinist as a Christian, but
Right, it just makes
so
no sense.
yeah.
And
Hmm.
it's like, yeah. Anyways, I could go on and on about Calvinism, but I'll
Yeah.
let you direct the conversation.
Can I so just initially um hearing your can I ask some questions about the
Yeah,
Odyssey?
sure. Yeah, whatever you want to talk about, it's your
Cool.
floor.
Okay, gotcha. So and just like, just genuine questions, trying to make sure I grasp what you're talking about here. So I guess one question, like just because maybe it was one of the last things you said, like towards the end, like other Christians sometimes want to say like, there's a there's a greater good at work here, that like that the allowance of a particular instance of evil or suffering or what have you is justifies that being allowed to happen. And so how is like I guess like how is yours different from that in this kind of way? Like what is the could the avoidance of creating the physical parameters of the universe in such a way that they would be perfect and result in consequences that you think would be unjustified, would that not itself qualify as like a greater good in that instance, or is there a differentiation? Is there a difference you would um, you would describe
Right.
there?
Right. So I'm differentiating between a greater, like, general good, in the
Hmm.
sense that, yeah, I think that God works everything towards a greater good overall. Like, but I see that largely in the afterlife,
Hmm.
but it's meticulous providence. That was the word I was looking for. But
Okay,
the idea of
gotcha.
meticulous providence, meaning like every little event, like, you won the lottery, or you didn't win the lottery, or every single thing is planned
Right.
out by God. And the
Event
idea,
one has a justification, and event two
yeah,
has its own justification, and so on. Okay.
yeah, and that's been critiqued by a number of Christian philosophers as being an implausible tenet, and I agree with them that it's pretty tough to defend that view. Now, it could be true, there's no
Hmm.
logical contradiction in it, but I think you're going to have to, it makes it a lot more difficult to defend, to respond to the problem of evil, just from the mere obvious fact that, I mean, it entails that God plans evil, right? So, and you could say he does it for a greater good, but it seems like some things aren't justifiable in allowing,
Hmm.
unless, I mean, okay, so let me repeat that: justifiable in allowing, not justifiable in planning. So
Right.
God
Okay.
could have a reason for not intervening, but to say he's going to plan for this event to happen is pretty difficult and to defend. And it's also really difficult to say, like, well, this horror happened to this person,
Hmm.
but that's going to lead to a greater good. Like, what greater good would there be? Now there could be one,
Hmm.
but what if God just transported somebody to heaven? I think they would be in the state of the highest good there could be.
Hmm.
But I don't know that they needed some horror to happen to them in order to enjoy that good anymore. Again, maybe somehow it leads to a greater good, but these are like some really difficult things to defend.
Hmm.
That so I'm arguing that, like, yeah, everything is allowed for some overall greater good, but not every event in it of itself is
Okay.
needed.
So it's kind of like an Occam's razor type thing. The one sort of overarching greater good is preferable than like a specific one for each instance of suffering. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. So like not every so like the greater good that's achieved would be the same amount of greater good in my theodicy as if there had been no suffering.
Okay.
But in these other theodicies, it's like the suffering does factor into the greater good. So maybe that's a way to phrase it
Okay.
so that it's a little bit clearer.
So how would well, I guess let me ask about this part too. So the the inference from like if God created the physical parameters of the universe as perfectly as he could, or in a way that corresponds to his perfectness. You have to help me with the way you define that. But the inference from if he does that, then that logically leads to a universe where we like what's the outcome from that you're arguing for, and how does maybe you could speak to more of like
Hmm.
how you draw out that inference, how you connect those dots. You know what I mean?
Sure. Right. And that's where the theodicy could get objected to, is that inference. So the idea is, though, that if so God being a perfect being is
Hmm.
going to necessarily desire for the perfect, or at least the most ideal state of affairs for agents, and that kind of motivates the problem of evil, because it's like, why would a morally perfect being want there to be suffering? And obviously it
Hmm.
would seem like they wouldn't. So the idea would be like, well, in a perfect universe or a heavenly universe or whatever you want to call it, there wouldn't be suffering, but there also wouldn't be evil desires either, because that would be a kind of imperfection. There wouldn't be any, so like God being the highest good and being in relation with others being a really important thing too. everybody would necessarily, just given the best psychological state or whatever you want to call it, be in this perfect union with one another, which is a great thing. But I argue that it's not, at least it's plausible that it wouldn't be okay to force somebody into a relation. You have to let them freely journey to that relationship. So that's why I argue that God wouldn't be able to start people in it. So he wants people to enter it, but you have to let people journey to it. So hope that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, help me with some of the, maybe you can speak to this, like, is could it be argued that, I don't know how to put this, like, is he forcing it? Is he forcing like perfect union, or is it just a logical outcome of his creating the, physical laws in such a way? Like, are those two the same thing in your view?
Yeah, so I would argue that if he creates people into that immediately, it would be a force because there wouldn't be any moment in which they're not. So it would be like you're thrust right into it. So that's where I'm arguing the force. So the laws themselves would bring it about, but it's like it would be simultaneous. So God creating, once people get created into that universe, it would be a simultaneous, perfect union. And I'm arguing that, at least plausibly, that would be a forced relation. Now, again, I can't prove that it is, but I'm saying, like, for all we know, like, that could be, the moral justification.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And what would be the, like, I guess it's kind of weird to think about, right? Because even if you say, like, well, he's forcing, whether you want to say it just kind of like logically follows, or it's entailed that he is forcing the outcome of beings existing in such a way that they will just be in perfect union with him. So there's no way out of that outcome. There's also, like, I mean, inherently in the theodicy, it's supposed that there are no evil desires. So there are no desires to the contrary. So he's not, if he is forcing something, he's not forcing anyone into anything that they're not even able to will against it, right? Conceptually. So what's the, like, if someone says something like that, like, yeah, but they don't, that's just kind of the thing he's forcing is just what they want, and, like, by, almost by necessity, maybe not, but like it's kind of entailed that they will want that. There's no way that they could otherwise. So how is that reprehensible that he'd do that?
Right. So I'm arguing that there's a kind of autonomy in relations. So, like, any kind of relationship, somebody should have the opportunity to enter into that relationship. So it would be the case that they would never not desire the relation, but that in and of itself is problematic. There should have been some type of trial period where they could have, at least in principle, not have entered into that relationship. So, it is the case that they never could have not, but that's where I'm arguing that it's problematic.
And why is that preferable?
Well, what do you mean by preferable? So, like, what's
I mean, like, you think like the relationship where you have the choice to be in it is preferable to the one in which you don't, right?
yeah.
Is what you're suggesting?
Yeah, so I'm arguing that it's just a moral principle. Now, one could disagree with the moral principle. I find it to be intuitive, and I think that's enough for the theodicy to go through as a possibility. But so I'm arguing, like, for all we know, like, this could just be a moral truth that you just can't force a relation. Now, somebody might have a conflicting view on whether that's a moral truth or not, but if it is a moral truth, then God has to abide by it, even if you don't agree with it. Like, we may have conflicting moral ideas, like we may find out, oh, like that was wrong. Like take like lying for example.
Hmm.
You may get to heaven and God says, you know, it's never okay to lie no matter what. And you're like, wow, like I had a totally different moral intuition on that. It's like, yeah, you were just wrong on that one, you know. But
Hmm.
if it is a moral truth, though, then God would have to abide by it as a perfect being. Now, I think it's defensible that it's a moral truth. So, in that regard, I think the theodicy is defensible, and I think that's enough for it to go through. Now, I do find it to be an intuitively plausible moral truth, but that would just be kind of the justification I would give.
Okay. I guess maybe one last kind of question about that, and then maybe I can sort of I can tell you something I've been thinking about relating to problem of evil. Maybe I can hear your thoughts on it. But so I guess what about like I mean, because I agree obviously that I guess this is where the kind of the dissonance is for me though, because like if you picture an individual dragging another person along with them who's saying like no I don't, please leave me alone, and they're like no, you're going to hang out with me and you're going to enjoy it, right? Like that's clearly there's something wrong with that relationship. But that's it's kind of weird, right? Because that like inherently the person is expressing like they actively have a desire not to be in the relationship. It does seem kind of like puzzling to say, if you see a totally different situation where someone is accompanied by another person and they're like yeah, let's go, let's hang out, and even if you say like, by the way, this person is not, this person is incapable of even having the desire to not hang out with me right now, like in the other instance, like I don't know, it's kind of weird. Might be less preferable to a situation where like the person has the choice and they're still but the first two, like I don't know that those are quite like on a par with each other. You see what I'm saying? Like I don't view them as equally problematic. And what's
So,
more
but
like
yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
well,
Well, no, I was
I'm just wondering what the contrast is. So, are you talking about contrasting like God creating somebody with desires and this person like forcing somebody to hang out with them? Is that the contrast, or?
yeah, I suppose so, as well as just general thoughts about like are we supposing this might not work at all. Please point out if it doesn't. But like a person who has a relative who is in a coma, let's say, and that person is so the person in the coma is incapable of you know like not a brain surgeon or anything, but like they're incapable. They don't seem to actively like have desires and have the ability to act on them. So the person, so there's another person who's saying, I'm going to look out for this person and make decisions with their best interest in mind on their behalf. So they're deciding for the person who is incapable of desiring otherwise. But yet that seems perfectly acceptable. So
Right,
like how would that,
right.
how does that contrast work in the theodicy?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good objection. So I would argue that using force isn't wrong. So like if somebody I see somebody's going to get hit by a truck and I run and push them out of the way, like that wouldn't be wrong. That would be called for. But I would say like when it comes to a relationship, that it's a little bit different. So like if I had some ability to like say like somebody before they're born they're developing in the womb and like I could remove a tumor or something like that would be justified. But like, what if I could like program their brain so that they just have like this loving devotion to me, and they can't get out of that at all. Like that seems a little
Hmm.
bit different, and I think that that does seem morally problematic. So that's where I'm more looking at it. And of course, it's not that like I think that having a relation with God is the highest good, but there's still something I see. At least it's defensible that forcing somebody into that could be morally problematic. Like there needs a window where somebody can go the other way. And that's why I think that hell has a plausibility. Now, I don't think hell is plausible as eternal torture, but the idea that somebody could go the other direction and not enter a relation with God, um, I think that at least it seems plausible to me in that regard.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, that's so here, maybe I'll share like just something I've been an idea I've trying to flesh out. And this may not, I don't know if this has any impact on what you've just kind of outlined here at all. So maybe you can tell me what you think, but like we'll probably end up agreeing more on this than not. But like, yeah, contemplating other various theodicies, again, solutions for the problem of evil. Um, it always seems like to me lately I've been thinking that all of them kind of like seem so. Let's say somebody like puts forth a theodicy like you know well God, of course, he like it's logically possible that God could have stopped X from happening. X is like some instance of evil. He could have stopped that, but there's this other, state of affairs or set of circumstances which, were he to stop that, it would conflict with this, like like the greater good kind of thing, like we were talking about earlier. So, so that's why. And it seems like most of the time, it's worth asking, like, well, God also, if God created everything, He created the circumstances such that they are that uh, you know allowing X was justified by Y, like Y being the greater good or whatever. Like he constructed the whole situation. So is it not logically possible for God to have created the state of affairs such as they are, but where X was not, like Y was not a thing, wasn't even something that was there to justify anything. Like we don't need that. Can't we like create things the same way? But there's that the circumstances are different, and in such a way that it would be all right for him to stop the instance of X or whatever, or not allow it or whatever. And then it seems like even possibly like if someone was to suggest, well, no, he couldn't have done that because of this other circumstance, you could just kind of give the same response and like, well, surely if he created, is it not logically possible that he could have created things such as they are where that was not required, and it's etc. So I don't know if that it just seems to me like there's a lot of the Odysseys that kind of suffer from that problem. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know if yours does. I'd have to think about it some more, but
Sure.
um,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point because there's some theodicies they'll raise these points that I'm thinking like, well, what about in heaven or if you say the new heavens and new earth or however they speak
mhm.
of the afterlife, and it's like, isn't God gonna make things better then? And then I'm wondering because sometimes they'll be like, well, this is how the physical world works or something, and I'm thinking like, well, yeah, but I'm wondering, presumably God's gonna make a better physical world,
Mhm.
but so in my view, and I think this is the traditional view, is that, there's something, so necessary things God wouldn't have providence over, right? But contingent
Mm-hmm.
things he would. So like, I don't think God decided that like 1 + 1 = 2. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that there's a possible world in which 1 + 1 = 3. That's just a necessary truth. And, somebody can debate about the grounding for the necessary truth, whether that's in God's nature or some Platonic realm, or however you cash that out. But God didn't like just come up with that, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say like, if something's a metaphysical necessity, that gets a little bit trickier. But I would say God doesn't have a decision over that either. He didn't decide that he would exist. I don't think he could decide that he not exist.
Mm-hmm.
So I make the argument, and I just argued this some in the video I posted earlier, that God. So my theodicy rests upon metaphysical necessity, but not logical necessity per se, but metaphysical
Mm-hmm.
necessity, and God wouldn't be able to have like done it differently, except but creating he would. But if he decides to create, there are these metaphysical necessities that he's working with, like the moral claim that I'm arguing about, force and relation. That's not something God could have decided, well, that is moral. It's just like a
Mm-hmm.
necessary truth. They're like the way that like the laws of physics, he has decision over what the laws of physics are, but he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have a decision over their their metaphysical connection, in the sense that like they work together as a system. I argue that like that's a metaphysical necessity of some kind. So there's some metaphysical sort of moral necessities built into the theodicy, but yeah, contingencies God does decide. So like to create the universe,
Mm-hmm.
who He's going to create, that sort of thing, and then God has a decision over. So, but that's where it gets tricky. It's like where the metaphysical necessities and the contingencies, they kind of overlap, right? So like there's going to be some relation between the two.
Okay.
So
Um,
hopefully that made some sense.
yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, how would you respond to like someone the like an objection with respect to gratuitous evils, right? Like, okay, God, let's say they buy like, God can't, they buy your the axiom that like God can't, if God creates people such that they can't desire evil, like that's naturally forcing them into relationship with Him. That's no good. But does it? Is there really no way around though? Like the the circumstances. So He can't create those physical laws of the universe. So He has to create these others. Is there really no other option for? Is there no other like way He could create those laws in which we still are like, we're not forced into a relationship, we can desire otherwise, but we can choose Him, but the level of gratuitousness that we would perceive of such evils would be less? Is that
Mm-hmm.
like, where does that come down to the metaphysical necessity part, or is there something else at play there that's responsible for that?
Yeah. So I want to clarify. I do think that God creates the laws, but just to unpack kind of like what my thought is on this, it's like
Mm-hmm.
he so say like he wants to create laws where there's going to be planets and a solar system of some kind,
Right.
but then there's the system of the laws, so like how they connect together. Let's say like if they were perfectly conformed to his mind or intellect and will, it would be there would be no possibility of volcanoes, etc. But
Mm-hmm.
when they're only partially, that system is only partially conformed to his intellect and will, there's still going to be planets of some sort, but then there's going to be planets with some other side effects like volcanoes and such. So it's a partial conformity, but it's not a complete harmony. And it's hard to come up with like a great analogy on that because it's
Mm-hmm.
different than anything. It's not like we're not sustaining a universe with our minds, but that's
Right.
just the closest way I can explain it. But yeah, so yeah, could he have done it with less? suffering than there is yeah, that's going to be a good question. I'm going to argue no, and I'm going to argue that there's just a kind of a synergy. So to like use an analogy is like in theology, so like a synergist is going to argue that like God and a person's free will kind of work together in their salvation. So like God helps me follow him, but I also freely accept it. There's a synergy, there's a causal synergy between the two. While a
Mm-hmm.
monergist is just going to argue, and you may be familiar with this, but I'm just repeating it, that God does all of the causal work. So he's the sole cause of that person accepting God and so on and having faith. So I'm arguing that in a way that the laws are synergistically, not because they have free will, but because of this, God only causally causes them to only partially conform. So there's this kind of synergistic conformity. So that the gratuitous suffering is a side effect. He didn't have a decision over that. It's just a
Okay.
necessary result. And that's kind of where, as we were alluding to earlier, that theodicy seems kind of may seem controversial to somebody because it's going to sound maybe like God isn't deciding things. But
Mm-hmm.
I do think that God has a deal of providence. I just don't think that the suffering, I just don't think is something that he has planned for. It's a unfortunate side effect. And the way I would back that up with scripture, at least, is like, and I always forget the verse, but it's in Romans 8 where it says, all of creation is groaning, and you probably heard this verse before, but let me pull it up just real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
So Romans 8:20, creation was subjected to, this translation says frustration, but other translations will say something like that. Anyways, I just see that as being very resonant with the theodicy that creation doesn't really act the way that is ideal, and then until it's set free from the bondage. And I'm not arguing that Scripture is teaching the theodicy. I just argue that they're
Right.
compatible. But
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, I mean, I'd have to think about it more. But I think that's probably where I would jump ship is like, the idea that like it's metaphysically impossible for, like, again, like even if I buy God can't create, the parameters of the universe perfectly. He can't do that because it leads to like less than desirable outcomes. But he also can't create them in such a way to where they are like almost identical to the way they are now, but like headaches aren't a thing. Like they just don't, that doesn't happen. Slight tweak, like that just doesn't manifest. Like, I mean, yeah, that's where I'd kind of like start scratching my head and be like, it seems like, I mean, I get that you're talking metaphysical possibility rather than logical. Does that entail that it's logically impossible? If it's if you say it's metaphysically impossible, does that entail logical impossibility?
yeah, so I wouldn't be an expert on cashing that out, but my
Yeah, me
understanding
neither.
would be that technically,
Yeah.
yeah, technically it would, but it
Okay.
would be called broad impossibility. So
Right. Okay.
example I like to use, but some people don't like this example, is like, is it possible for a ghost to eat a sandwich? And
Mm-hmm.
you would say, sure, why not? But then it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, wait, a ghost is like a spirit, and they can't crunch down on something. You'd be like, well, I guess not. It's like, well, is it logically impossible then? Yeah, I guess so, but it's not analytically. It's not an
Uh-huh.
analytical possibility, but it's a broad impossibility. So
Right.
it is. It's just not. I would say just not analytically impossible. So yeah, just to reiterate, I think that God creates these laws, and then or the system, or however you want to think about it, and then it just sort of he's willing it to match his desires to a degree, but he can't do it to the full degree, so he
Mm-hmm.
does it to a partial degree. But then that partiality necessarily entails that there's going to be some unwelcome side effects. So to then say, well, couldn't he have done it just a little better? It's like, well, once you grant that it's partial, then it's partial. In my view, it's like there's going to be some unwanted side effects at that point, and then I think it opens up a can of worms that we don't know what those side effects would be, and for all we know, it could be the universe we have.
Right. I see. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I'll have to think about that more.
Yeah, but you raise good objections, though. I mean, those are going to be the objections, or at least, I mean, there's some others too, and I've been working on a paper on this to try to go through a lot of it in a clear way, but yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of objections that can get raised, but I do still really like it that it's more unified than a lot of theodicies. That I think like a lot of the theodicies are plausible at kind of this general level, but when you get to like extreme suffering, it seems difficult to apply them to those cases. Now, my theodicy I think is hard to understand, and it might seem a little odd, but then if it makes sense to somebody and they accept the starting points, I think it is applicable to the cases. So that's where I think it has some teeth in that regard. But
Yeah,
it's going to
totally.
come down to somebody's intuitions, and it's difficult. So.
Yeah, it's frustrating, isn't it? And yeah, that would be, I mean, yeah, that's really interesting because obviously you would like, I could see a lot of theists jumping ship being like, stuff that God isn't responsible for. Like, I don't like the sound of that. But so that's interesting. Yeah, it's a different approach.
Yeah. Well, and it follows most closely with Thomas Ord and Kirk McGregor, but I don't like the way that their theodicies are similar, and that I kind of followed them, but I think that their theodicies have some problems, which I could go into, but you don't have to. But those would be kind of where they're more similar to the way that I argue.
So here, maybe we could switch gears a little bit. How much longer do you want to go for? I'm good for whatever.
Yeah, we could probably go for another like 15, and then maybe
Okay.
we'll come back on again at some point, because there's a lot of stuff we could always talk about.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's a lot out there. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, you just tell me one. So I've got. Yeah, you linked my channel, I think, in this video, and I've got like one video on fine-tuning argument, and then I did another that's just kind of like a general response to a video that Braxton Hunter made. I'm sure you know who he is. Recently.
Yeah, I was wondering if he was responding to you, because he responded to a bunch of people. I don't think he responded to you.
Probably not.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I haven't seen his response yet. And I think it was
there
just
were some British guys he was responding to. I was wondering if you were one of them, but
no,
it doesn't sound like it.
No, this unfortunately not. That'd be pretty cool. But yeah, but I'm thinking of I've been kind of thinking about this argument, maybe doing a video on it. And I'm curious if you think this argument has teeth, as you said, or not. The kind of like, it usually goes along these lines, like the attacking determinism on, so assuming one's there are a couple inferences there that I would have problems with. Like, it's usually the way it's usually set up is like, okay, if you're an atheist.
Sorry, but what argument are you talking about?
Yeah, so I'm here. Let me lay it out for you. So it usually starts like, okay, if you are an atheist, then if atheism is true, then naturalism is true. So that's inference number one. And if naturalism is true, determinism is true. So you can talk about that, but they usually lead up to that and then say, but on determinism, rationality is impossible, basically, right? And the reason for that is there's no free will, and if there's no free will, then you can't freely choose to use your rationality and choose between one of two options or more. So it's like a reductio, right? Like rationality is impossible on determinism. And so I've been thinking about making a video on that because I think it kind of, do you jive with this argument? Have you heard it? And do you agree with that, or?
Yeah, Frank Turek's big on that argument. And yeah, I think I saw you
Yeah.
talking about that on Twitter. Real quick, by the way, I'm going to get to it in a second,
Uh-huh.
but John Buck wanted to know
Yeah.
where your name comes from on your Twitter.
Oh, yeah. As you can see, maybe you can see behind me, there's like a piano and some drum stuff. I play some instruments. So, uh, instrumental reason.
Oh,
I'm also a fan of a good pun or a bad one. So my name is, one of the
I
two,
get
whichever
it.
you think it is.
Why is half your picture like blurry? Is that like is it meant to be like the mind is like clearer than the rest of the
Oh,
body?
right.
Like
Yeah. That's also
so
just
that
like, that's really good. I will take that answer. It's just like a random picture, but,
uh,
but yeah, let's go with
I was
that.
I was trying to figure it out for a while. Anyways, that was
Yeah, you were like
that was
reading
my
more
thought.
meaning into it than I did. I hope it's not like my picture or anything. Like I don't own
Yeah. Well,
that, so I
I
hope someone
figured you
doesn't
might
come
have.
after me for using that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyways, yeah. So this argument, yeah, it's like one of those arguments that like sounds really strong. I think
hmm
for a minute, but like or for however long, but then it's like I think it's problematic. So, I mean, first of all, I don't think naturalism entails determinism. So I'm pretty lenient about
hmm
naturalists. Like I following kind of like Graham Oppy and people like naturalists can argue anything. They just don't believe that in God.
right.
I don't really go that like evidential route. Like, well, you can't have this under naturalism. Like, I just don't think
hmm
that a lot of those arguments follow. I get where they're coming from, but I don't really argue that way. So I think a naturalist can believe in free will. Just a lot of times they tend not to.
hmm
Um, it makes sense though, I guess, but I got to unpack more why. But yeah, I think a naturalist can believe in free will. But let's just assume that they can't or that they
hmm
don't. Does that entail that you don't have reason, excuse me, that you don't have reason? And I think that in one level, so like Randall Rousers critique this argument, and
Oh, I haven't seen that. I'll have to. Maybe you could send that
I'll
to me,
send
or
you
I'll have
the
to find it.
article
Yeah.
because Jay Lauder of Secular Outpost debated Frank Turek years ago, and Frank Turek brought this
Right.
argument up because I think he always does. I can't remember what Jeffrey Lauder responded with, but Rouser didn't like the argument, and
hmm
I think his objection was, oh yeah, his objection was that we don't have freedom over our beliefs anyways, because he was saying like doxastic voluntarism's false,
hmm
the idea that we choose our beliefs. So, we don't now. I'm kind of on the fence on that. I think
Okay.
I do think we choose our beliefs to some degree, but I think you can defend that you don't, but I kind of think we do to some degree. But another objection is like, well, a calculator
hmm
reasons like in some sense, but it's deterministic. Now I would object to that because I don't think a calculator really reasons. I think it just shows things on a screen. But I would say though that
Well, it's like
if
computating,
somebody's a
right?
yeah, well, and
It's
that's
like
where it gets tricky. Like, but
performing.
it's not conscious though, so it's about. I think it's a false analogy to say it's reasoning
Okay.
when really it's like would I say that like a windmill is reasoning? I mean, it's doing stuff like there's inputs and outputs of some kind, but I wouldn't say a windmill is reasoning. And I look at a
hmm
calculator as no, it's electrical. I mean, so can a windmill. I don't look at a calculator being different than a windmill in that regard.
hmm
But so like if somebody's a compatibilist, they're gonna have a different conception of free will, and they're gonna probably have a different conception. But let's just say that they're not a
Right.
compatibilist.
hmm
It just seems like you could say you are forced to believe, like I'm forced to believe I'm talking to you right now
hmm
because my eyes are detecting it and my brain processes it and my brain comes up with the conclusion that I'm talking to you, and my brain is also forced to believe that anything that it's experiencing must be true, and like none of that involved free will, but it's still
hmm
reasonable because it's
Right.
in accordance with all axioms of reason. And
Yeah.
it's like that does seem like that's coherent. But then on another side, it's like, well, take something like that's not so obvious. Like, do I believe in God? Like, I feel like I do have freedom over that choice, but if you don't, it's still going to be in accordance with axioms of reason.
Hmm.
And I don't know that you need free will to still reason, but I
Right.
get why somebody might think that you do,
Hmm.
because they experience a kind of choice. Like, I'm reflecting, I'm making a kind of choice. And I think a lot of times people conflate free will with making a choice, so they think that the two
Hmm.
go hand in hand. And a determinist agrees we make choices. They just don't think they have the ability to have
Right.
made a different choice.
Hmm.
And I think that's where determinism to me seems intuitively wrong, because I just think it's experientially false.
Hmm.
But I
Right.
don't know that I don't know that reasoning requires libertarian free will though.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, okay, yeah, that's interesting because yeah, I had a lot of similar thoughts. I mean, um, yeah, I don't myself believe in free will, and we can. I don't know if I would like say determinism, but um, but I don't believe in free will, and maybe we can talk about that another time, maybe. But yeah, like um, I think this argument is like is pretty. I don't think it checks out, but I think it's interesting for. I think apologists are using it. It makes sense to me that they're using it because free will is such a, like you said. I mean, experientially, like start talking to somebody about how we don't have free will, and a lot of people look at you like you're crazy because it just feels like, yeah, I just made that choice back there, and I'm about to make another one freely, and like, so I think it like on a gut intuitive level, like you present this argument, a lot of people are going to be like, yeah, this is ridiculous, like like no free will, you can't. And yeah, I've seen the louder debate, and so I think Turret kind of like his his formation of the argument in that debate kind of hinges more on like the whole inherent, I think, in his argument is it basically just boils down to like physical processes alone cannot result in like an agent who, and maybe even like at its worst, I mean, I want to be charitable obviously, but maybe even at its worst is like like the electrons and the atoms and like everything going on that composes your mind on naturalism. If that's it, it just boils down to that. Well, those things aren't capable of making choices, so why should they result in you know uh, producing a being who can make a choice? Like if they can't, then you can't, basically. And I think that's, and yeah, I think Lauder's response is kind of funny because he's basically like, he's just like, yeah, I don't follow that. Like, why? Like he doesn't really think that. And I kind of agree with that sentiment, but it doesn't always. So the formation doesn't always hinge upon that. But another way. I mean, I agree with you. I think you said this earlier, and yeah, I kind of agree with this. It's like the idea, like, and this was, I think, there are lots of people who have kind of made this argument recently. There was a while back, I guess it was last year, maybe, like Justin Brierley of Unbelievable and Alex O'Connor kind of had a discussion about this, and Justin, I kept inevitably sort of saying like, look, that's just what being rational and reasoning just entails free will. Like it's just definitionally, it's got to be there, or it can't happen. And I'm just kind of like, citation needed. Like why? What's the? And you're not gonna. I don't think you're gonna pop open a textbook and see that definition anywhere. So like, what's the justification for that definition? So yeah, it sounds like our sensibilities towards this argument are um, pretty aligned. So
Yeah, I go back and forth because, like, I think that, yeah, you're right. Turek sounds kind of like his argument is like, well, atoms can't think, they just obey,
mm-hmm.
physical laws. So, like, of course, they're not reasoning, but it seems like it's more of kind of this sort of reductionism about the mind. And I feel like that's kind of where, and it sounds really intuitive. It's like, oh, well, of course, like atoms don't reason. And then it's
Right.
like, yeah, you're right. And if naturalism, and I guess that's where I just disagree, because I don't think a naturalist has to be a reductionist about the mind, even though a lot are. So that's where
Right.
it gets tricky. Like a lot of times atheists, it seems like atheist community hold to these kind of like materialist tenets that maybe some atheists in the philosophical community more don't hold to,
Yeah.
and I try to respect, where I recognize that people may not hold to a certain view. So I don't think that. So that's why I don't really agree with Tarek's argument. Now,
Sure.
John Buck has brought up that he thinks Braxton Hunter's argument's a little different. Now, I don't understand totally what John's saying here, but maybe you do.
Okay.
Then he followed up with another one.
Renegade assert stance.
I think maybe he's saying like you're always, and when you're reasoning, you're always like maybe hinting two options. Maybe that's what you're saying, John.
Yeah, maybe if he's like for any circumstance you to do one and the other. Maybe if he's still there, give a little flesh to that. I have heard Braxton Hunter's. I've heard him. He presents this argument in his debate with Dillahunty. I think he did a video recently with Tim Stratton, I think his name is, on this argument. So I've heard Braxton give it. I think he would. I think I've heard him say that he make the assertion that I was saying earlier that freedom, like if you're baking the rationality cake, free will is a necessary ingredient. You got to have it in there, definitionally. And I've never, and not that there, of course, it would be wrong to say I've never heard justification for it, so there is none. Like there might be, maybe I haven't thought about it hard enough, but I just never hear that and the reason that is the case is because, and then, follow that up with I've never heard that argued for. And it's that's what I'm curious about is why think that? And so let me see if I can give this really succinctly, because I know our minutes are kind of taken away, but basically I kind of want to say okay, so let's imagine determinism is the case. There's this, I've heard it kind of when apologists give this argument sometimes, some apologists, they'll say they'll kind of characterize it like this, right? Like on determinism, the universe is just, why do you believe X and not Y? You're given a choice between two things, maybe you're faced with there's a logical inference you have to make or something, and you choose X instead of Y. Why did you do that? Well, the universe just kind of happened that way, and that's where the dice landed, and the universe just handed you that belief, and you just believe it because that's how things go, and there's almost as if it's arbitrary. Now, interesting. I mean, 2 points there. Interestingly enough, if determinism is true, then by definition, it seems nothing is arbitrary. There's a reason for everything. So they're kind of characterizing it look, you were just kind of randomly, for all you know, if determinism is true, you just believe this randomly for no reason. But it's determinism. Everything has a reason for why it happens. So nothing is random or left up to chance. There is no chance. But also, I kind of want to say, look, imagine determinism is true. What's wrong with this? With saying the reason you chose X instead of Y in that situation is because you were determined to have the rational faculties to the degree that you do, and that is, and you utilize those rational faculties to choose X instead of Y. Because so obviously I would I'm not assuming that I'm assuming that free will is not required for rationality, and also like everyone can get behind, like, obviously I don't think this anyone's going to dispute this, like people have rational faculties to different degrees, right? Like there are definitely some people are more irrational than others, some people are more rational than others, although nobody is like perfectly rational. We have rationality to degrees. It's not like everyone's at the same level. Um, and uh, and so I kind of want to say, like, what's wrong with on viewing it like that? Like, yeah, you may have been determined. You're determined to have. You can't just will yourself to be more rational, right? Like to be like to an above average. Because I think I'm probably like an average level, hopefully, rational level as a person. Like I can't will myself to like be. I can work at it and try to get smarter, but I'll kind of wrap it up here because I'm going on and on. But you have, so like determinism, you come out, with the ability to be as rational as you can be, like to a certain extent. You have no control over that. But if you are presented with a choice or a logical problem, mathematical, problem, whatever, that and your rational faculties that you've been handed, so to speak, meet the requirements and enable you to, execute that rational problem or make that rational choice adequately, then I don't see any problem in you being able to execute that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I do think it comes down to how one views reason and consciousness and decision making, and there's kind of a relation between the three. So that's what it sounded like you were saying, like that there's a level of like rationality and reflection involved, but that doesn't necessarily require freedom. Is that kind of what you're getting at? Like, so
I'm saying I don't see where freedom comes into play. Because and I don't think I don't think that this would be argued against too heavily. Maybe, I don't know. But like, the idea that even on like a free will view, even if you're someone who thinks we have free will, we can't use it to like, we can't will ourselves to know things that we don't, right? And we can't, like, if I am at, if one accepts that there are, you can be, an individual can be rational to certain extents, like on average, right? Like you can be, like on average, you can be above average sort of rationality, or average or below average. Like there's some stupid people out there, right? So, and you can't, so even if you think we have free will, like presumably you don't think we can use our free will to raise or lower ourselves along that scale of like,
I see. So you're saying we can't like
the
decide
capabilities of your own,
to
like your own
decide to become
rational
more
faculties.
rational. Yeah, I think that's true. I think though, so yeah, you can't like decide you're gonna have more knowledge or more intelligence, but I do think it's plausible in the sense of, I think at least the intuition of the argument kind of comes down to like the math problem. Take like math for example. Like you can't decide like 1 + 1 = 2. Is that going to be reasonable or not? But you can decide like, am I going to do math or not? And like, is it reasonable to do math or not? So I guess like it does seem like there's a kind of reasoning that seems like you need to make a decision. And if you have the intuition that a decision requires libertarian free will, then it seems like that kind of decision also requires libertarian free will. I think is where the argument's coming from. But a determinist, of course, is not going to accept the claim that a decision requires libertarian free will. So I
Right.
think that's where the argument comes down to. But yeah, what's interesting is it's like one of these arguments that like I don't see a lot of like professional philosophers defending and debating about, but like it comes up a lot like in apologetic circles. And yeah, I'm not persuaded by the argument, but yeah, it's like one of these arguments it's hard to pin down like why it sounds persuasive, and it's really hard to like pin it down. But
Yeah.
I think that's where that maybe you're coming from, is like, well, like, was it reasonable to vote in the election? And it's like, well, I had to sit and think about that, and I had to, weigh
Right.
my options. And it's like, it seemed like there was a choice involved. But I wonder if the argument's committing a fallacy of accidents, where it's like, just because something is involved doesn't mean they're essential. So it's
Right.
like, if you think you have libertarian free will,
Hmm.
then yes, you did exercise that in reasoning. But if you don't think you have libertarian free will, then you didn't exercise it. And it's like, I kind of feel like now, talking about it, it might be committing a fallacy of accidents.
That might be a good way to put it. I mean, yeah, and that's um, yeah. I think it just kind of going back to the thought of like arbitrariness, like it also seems to kind of like the whole suggestion, right, is like is there's the motivating fear of like if the universe just handed to you like and you don't have free will, you aren't able to vet this, then like you're just gonna eat what it's feeding you, right? So and the whole it, you know the the critique that they're sort of levying is like on this view, you could be, like let's say you choose X instead of Y, in a situation, like you could have been wrong about that decision because like if you were just determined to make that decision and so you had no choice, so like it could have been wrong and you wouldn't know it because you were determined to choose it. um, and I just kind of want to say like, well obviously like free will doesn't get rid of that concern. Like even if you think we have free will, like you could be one could think we have free will and also accept like you could think you chose the wrong thing and not and be mistaken and not know it. So it's it's like, yeah, it may be an accidental property and not an essential property. It's just weird that they're kind of raising these objections, like, kind of like that one. And I want to say, like, well, if is how is free will the like, how is free will going to like swoop in and solve that? Like it doesn't. I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
that's right. I think that the argument really does end up seeming kind of like Turek's argument, like Turek's version. Like, it's like, well, because under naturalism, you're just a bunch of atoms, and atoms don't really think about any. Like, it ends up being this more
right,
like argument against reductionism of the mind,
right,
and rather than it really being about free will. But I do kind of lean towards thinking that the argument's probably this kind of fallacy of accidents. It's like, well, I have to make choices when I make decisions through my life, and
right.
choices are free, so reasoning involves choices, so reasoning requires freedom. Like that might be where the argument's coming from. But really,
Hmm.
it's one of the, I really haven't seen like a debate where it's just on that argument, and really it should be fleshed out more, because like if it's a good argument, people should use it, but it doesn't really get fleshed out. It kind of just gets thrown around. And but
Yeah, to my knowledge, it's it's kind of an extrapolation from an argument that C.S. Lewis makes in one of his works. I forget which one, but kind of like his critique of
yeah,
naturalism.
yeah, John Buck brought that up too in
Oh, did he?
Miracles in the comments. But
Okay.
yeah, that's what I think you're thinking
Yeah,
of.
I think. Yeah, I've read some of Van Inwagen's. Yeah, it's from Miracles. That's right. Yeah, Van Inwagen has written about it, and I've been reading that recently. And yeah, I mean, one last kind of thought on the the Turek thing. Like the whole thing of like, well, the atoms in your brain aren't reasoning all day, so like how is it that you're able to achieve reasoning? And again, I kind of want to say like, well, presumably they don't have free will either. So that, it would cut both ways. And I think his response would be like, well, it's not that they need free will. It's not about that. It's something different. And so that has to do with something else with how you get that. And so I just want to be like, okay, well, I feel like I can do the same thing and say, it's not about that. The atoms don't need to be like sitting up there, making choices and stuff like, so. Okay. And I was trying to read what John was saying more about, like fleshing out the Braxton's argument. He seems to hold there must be the option to accept or reject a premise. Yeah, it is kind of weird to like, it's hard to, that's why I'm like, I think I'm pretty close to doing like a video on it. It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around, isn't it? But I still, even that, like, there must be an option to accept or reject. I mean, my kind of just gut level response is like, sure, and you can consider those options, and make a rational choice. And I think you're right about the accidental. Like, it'd be one thing if it's a totally different thing to say, right, that like free will is like an essential property of rationality, like it's a necessary component of making a choice. That's obviously much stronger than like it being an accidental property. And yeah, I still want to see the strong claim of essential property, if that's what it is, be backed up by, and maybe I can try to like think on my own of what it is. I mean, again, it's not like I'm saying, well, I can't think of what it is, therefore there isn't one, but I just, I'm just like, I have no idea where that would be, how you would even try to argue for that.
Yeah, I think this is the one that John wanted me to, or maybe it was this one. Not sure, but yeah, John doesn't defend the argument, but but yeah, it would be interesting to flesh it out, and I bet if you do a response video that Braxton might respond to it if you tag him in it, but or at least I think he tends to like to respond to stuff. But yeah, I'd love to have you back on sometime. But is there anything else that you wanted to share before we sign off?
No, not at all. I've really enjoyed the discussion. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, I'd be down to do it again sometime for sure.
Yeah. And anybody else watching, anybody else who ever wants to come on, what is this comment? They're welcome to. I don't think that all the leftist priests and bishops and cardinals, Francis. Oh, I definitely think it's problematic. I just think that, is it problematic for Catholic claims to papal infallibility? I don't, because only certain claims have to be infallible, like when he's speaking for the church as a whole. But yeah, I mean, the stuff that Pope Francis has done, I don't defend a lot of his decisions, like some of the stuff related with China and things, but that's different. Can of worms.
Yeah, I wasn't, like I said at the beginning of the video, like I wasn't raised in the Catholic tradition, but so there's lots about it I don't know, and I'm always interested to learn more. I actually attended my first Catholic service last year. I think it was sometime. It was kind of under sad circumstances because it was a funeral, but I had still always like wanted to go, out of curiosity. And I know some Catholics. I have friends and family who are, but yeah, it was interesting. And like I said, I don't know a ton about it, so I'm always interested to kind of like learn more in the differences between, the tradition I was kind of brought up in and that one.
Yeah, and I know that. Okay, so Susan says that we're not talking about papal claims. Yeah, I understand. I was just clarifying where I was coming from, but okay, we're gonna sign off.
Yeah, totally.